everyone, and welcome to Braveheart, 40 Years of the Fifth Doctor. This panel is part of the BritTrack content for Virtual DragonCon 2022. So in 1982, Peter Davison, at that time the youngest actor to have ever taken on the role of the Doctor, made his debut on Doctor Who. Over the course of 3 seasons, he and his numerous companions took the audience on lots of adventures through time and space. We'll be covering the highs and lows of his era, favorite stories, companions, villains, and what impact the Davison era had on Doctor Who as a whole. And I've got a lovely group of folks who are joining me for this. So, Andy Teal, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Catherine Sullivan.
Oh.
Joe Heath.
Here.
Oh, sorry, Joe Heath.
Howdy.
Drew Meyer.
Howdy.
And Jason Miller.
Hey guys, and my cat Smudge will be in and out for the rest of the hour.
Smudge is always welcome. All right, so let's talk about our beginnings with Mr. Davison and the Fifth Doctor. So my introduction to Doctor Who as a whole was the original broadcast of the 5 Doctors on November 23rd, 1982 at a friend's house. My PBS station was in the middle of the Tom Baker run at that time, so I saw the 5 Doctors, and then like the following Saturday, we were right back with Tom Baker and, Sarah Jane and the Mask of Mandragora. So I'm curious to know if your experience with the Fifth Doctor, did it begin on first run or as close to first run as your PBS station was doing, or is it something that you came to later on? Anybody can jump in.
Oh. Well, my PBS station was again showing Tom Baker. They didn't get the Peter Davison episodes until May of '83, but I already had connections, so I was getting the, as we know it as the Purple Lips Pink Celery versions of converted copies. So I was able to get a little sneak peek of them.
Nice.
I saw it on its first run on Georgia Public Television. When I think I started watching with the Fourth Doctor. My brother's memory of it is different. He says there was a Fifth Doctor episode, and then they skipped back to Robot and started from there. I remember watching all the Fourth and then starting the Fifth.
All right.
I wasn't alive yet, so that's why I didn't watch it when it originally aired. I think the first Fifth Doctor thing I saw was probably Time Crash, which is New Who.
Right.
But I started doing a podcast with my wife where we're watching through all of classic Doctor Who, and we did it in order. So that's how I first saw the Fifth Doctor, was for the podcast.
While I was alive, I didn't watch Doctor Who until New Who showed up. So I went back and I did a pilgrimage. So I watched all of Doctor Who in order, at least what was available at the time. So somewhere in the summer of 2012, I hit the Fifth Doctor and pretty much watched it from start to finish at that point.
Nice.
And my very first Doctor Who ever was Time Flight Part 1. So I began with Peter Davison on my local PBS station, Channel 21, Long Island, New York. And I didn't like Time Flight, but by the time we got to Arc of Infinity, I was intrigued. And by the time we hit the Enlightenment Part 1 cliffhanger, I was hooked. I never missed another episode after that, and that was nearly 40 years ago. So thank you very much. Peter Davison is the reason I'm here today.
Awesome.
Nice.
And I mean, if you started out with Time Flight and you kept going, that's perseverance,
like
man.
Time Flight.
Boy, am I some fan.
Right, exactly. Okay, so what do you think is the most characteristic thing about the Fifth Doctor era? I'm just talking like a general overview. What do you think it is that set it apart from all the rest of Doctor Who? Like in the overall spectrum of Doctor Who, what's unique about the Fifth Doctor period?
He's just a sweet, sweet boy.
Yeah, his vulnerability, because so those of us who came into the Davison era as fans of All Creatures Great and Small remember him playing Tristan.
Yep.
And yes, he didn't quite know what he was doing. And that kind of reflected in some of the stories, which is odd because we had the other doctors be captured, be hit, be very vulnerable, but it just seemed like throughout most of his adventures, the Davison doctor was a little bit more fragile than the others. So hard to phrase what I'm talking about, though. He was
A general
basically
frustration.
Yeah,
That's something I was going to bring up. Like, I've always loved the way each Doctor is sort of a reaction to the previous Doctor in terms of personality, whether the writers did it on purpose or just because they wanted to do something different. Whereas the fourth Doctor, who was significantly older, was much more of a child. Like, he was sort of this, he had the childlike exuberance, and he'd dive into any situation. Whereas the fifth Doctor, despite looking much younger, was very much the adult in the room. Like, when it came to his companions, and I didn't pick up on it the first time I watched it. You know, as a kid, the frustration, the growing frustration with everyone and everything. When I watched it for the first time as an adult, when I did a full watch through, it was. I always thought of him as this very nice, very sort of open guy, and he was. But he also was constantly getting exasperated with everyone around him.
He seemed less in control than previous Doctors, perhaps.
Yeah.
Mm. Jason, what does Smudge think about the Fifth Doctor era?
Smudge is trying to get my attention so I can feed her, but I will tell you that for me, as an 11-year-old watching in the mid-'80s, this was the MTV British Invasion era Doctor. As you recall, when MTV started out, the only videos they had to play were British artists, and that created the British Invasion. It might not have been intentional, but it was in the air. So the Peter Davison era is any early 80s MTV British Invasion video. Martin Clunes, Tegan and Nissa with their costumes. And then you have, often, especially when Paddy Kingsland is composing the music, you have a very rock and roll score. Like the soundtrack for Modern Undead is very rock and roll. So it is very, very much a piece of its era. It's a very colorful, very unique moment in British, and then, of course, thanks to MTV, American pop culture. And that's the superficial visual surface level.
You know, it's interesting that what you just mentioned, because I'm doing some watching through of the Peter Davison era now for a different project, and have really come to a whole new appreciation for Paddy Kingsland. Like, her scores are just fantastic, and I'd never really noticed it as much before. So, good point. Let's talk about Mr. Davison himself. So we talked about his era and what makes it unique in Doctor Who. What do you think Peter Davison himself brought to the part? What do you think he added to our understanding of who the Doctor is?
I'm curious to what the panel thinks about this, but it seems like Davison might have been like the most popular actor to get the role of the Doctor coming into the part, which is something that, you know, nowadays we get that a lot in Modern Who, but at this point in time, he really has a lot of momentum bringing into it. Plus, being so young, that must have been kind of mind-blowing for fans at the time.
Yeah. I think Hartnell was pretty well known. Hartnell was pretty well known as a film actor, not necessarily as a television presence. But Troughton was a character actor. He had done Robin Hood years before. But I think Davison is definitely, as far as like current watching, he was currently on All Creatures Great and Small. He was currently on Sink or Swim. So he was very much in people's living rooms at that time. It's a very different dynamic.
Well, he was considered to be the heartthrob Doctor, even though Tom Baker did have a lot of female followers. That was more why he was supposed to be trimmed back and basically said no hanky panky in the TARDIS, because he was a younger Doctor.
Yeah, I was watching All Creatures at the time, and I don't know why it wasn't weirder for me that Tristan suddenly became the Doctor. I remember I noticed, and I went, "Oh, that's odd," but it didn't really affect my perception of the character, which is nice looking back. I don't know why.
I kind of feel like he's the first Doctor out of the five that is really acting more so than just leaning into their personality in a way.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like, he actually is I feel like he's taking a more actor approach to it more than just personality approach.
Maybe Hartnell, because
Yeah,
I always
Hartnell.
assumed he was leaning into his personality, but apparently he was nothing like that in real life.
Mm.
I want to build on what Joe said because it's really interesting. Going behind the scenes, the production team had no idea who the Fifth Doctor was supposed to be. They had a costume before they had a personality. So Peter Davison has to act against the scripts and decide who his Doctor is. So he's playing the sarcastic Doctor. He is always rolling his eyes at his companions. He is always doing little bits of humorous acting on screen that are not scripted, like tossing a coin and then walking in the wrong direction. He brings a very unique energy to the role, and especially when you're watching in sequence like Drew did after 7 years of Tom Baker, it's very refreshing to have a sarcastic Doctor like that.
He's also the first actor to take on the part who grew up watching the show. So I'm wondering, what that brings to his understanding of it. I mean, I think Tom was aware of it, but Peter Davison, as a kid, watched Doctor Who. He watched the very first Hartnell episode.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's in itself is a whole different dynamic for the show right there.
And he was playing the old man in the young man's body, as Peter Davison says on some of the DVD commentary. So there's a little bit of Hartnell in his performance for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, too, that Matt Smith does a lot of that, who, however many decades later became the youngest actor to ever play it. But he did that same thing where he's playing the old man in a young body. And I think it's fascinating to watch in both cases.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I
So,
wish the writers had followed up on that, because in the 5 Doctors, all the other Doctors kept deferring to the first Doctor, even though in terms of their run, he would have been the youngest Doctor. On the other hand, that was the Doctor closest to Gallifrey, so he would have had the memories more entrenched than the others.
Mm.
But they never really deferred back to the 5th Doctor as the oldest of them.
Exactly. They go by physical appearance rather than chronological age, which could have been a much more interesting angle.
Yeah.
So we mentioned companions. Let's talk about that, because we have a really interesting mix of characters that are traveling around with the Doctor. And, sometimes leads to an argumentative sort of environment. As Jason said, the Doctor gets a little frustrated, rolls his eyes at his companions. So talk about that, especially that initial mix of characters where we kind of have a throwback to Hartnell, where you've got a Doctor plus 3 companions. What do you think that does to the dynamic of the show?
Well, the nice
I'm
thing
really
about
curious
it,
to see what the rest of the group feels about the crowded TARDIS. Do you think that this crowded TARDIS works or doesn't work, just in general, with our Artiga, Nyssa, Adric setup?
I love it. I absolutely love the 3 companions. Yeah, it worked very well for me. Each one of them had a distinct personality. None of them felt forced. I loved watching, because they really started introducing character development at this point. I loved watching Adric's frustration that the Doctor was no longer sort of his jovial uncle playmate friend, and kept telling him to stop doing things. I love the 3 companions.
And I like the fact that they have Nyssa and Tegan as friends instead of having the controversial, oh my gosh, they're being rivals, but they weren't. They were really friends, and it worked out so well with those 2.
Yeah.
I generally liked the crowded TARDIS. I think they worked as like a group. I think the writing sometimes let them down. I feel like they were trying too hard to have like a soap opera feel to it, and would occasionally just have these confrontations for no reason other than drama that didn't really come from character. It just came from they got to have a conflict because this is what the show is about now. So I didn't care for that aspect of it, but I like when they're not being forced to have conflict for no reason. I think they're great. Like the first episode of Black Orchid is just them all hanging out and having fun. That's beautiful. I love that. So and Adric just gets to eat a lot of food. That's great.
It's problematic in the very beginning. If you take Forward to Doomsday, the very first episode they make, where Adric turns evil and Nyssa tries to steal the TARDIS, and nobody knows how to write for Nyssa. She's unconscious for all of part 3. That's a problem. But as Joe says, by the time you get to Black Orchid, the 4 of them as a team are just supremely fun to watch
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't agree.
Excellent.
I actually find them really frustrating, and mainly the same way that, for the reasons that Joe says, I think that they're all 4 characters are by themselves very interesting, but I don't think they work necessarily. And I think the idea that the writers are trying to create drama where, as everyone says, it seems better when they're not conflicting. I also think that Nyssa is possibly the best supporting character the show's ever had, and is completely wasted. Like, I would watch the Nyssa show. I would watch the Doctor and Nyssa show. I mean, like, I don't think there's ever been a character on Doctor Who whose backstory has been so compelling, and yet so little was done with. And I find, just like the Fifth Doctor, I'm very frustrated with this particular era, because there's so much potential for it that I just feel like they never suss it out in 3 seasons.
Well, that's what Big Finish is for.
There's my
and I was just going to say two points there. One, listen to, and I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the audience. Go and listen to the audios that are the Fifth Doctor and Nyssa. They're phenomenal, and I think that you see it a little bit in Arc of Infinity, where it's just the Doctor and Nyssa kind of taking on, and it works so well. The other point is, once Adric leaves, you have this new character coming in named Turlo. And when you're talking about creating drama, here is a character that's put in place specifically to be a negative influence. So what do you think about the change of character and what Turlo added to that chemistry, to that mix?
I love Turlo. He was my first new companion, because remember, I came in with Time Flight, so for my first Mark Strickson, I cannot praise enough. The energy that he brings to Turlo, even in stories where he's kind of put in the background and doesn't have much to do, Strickson plays up the intensity. He is untrustworthy. Even when he's an ally, you're not quite sure whose side he's on.
Yeah.
Having a red-haired companion is a great idea. He's always wearing the suit and tie is a great idea. Mark Strickson is probably the underrated companion. And Turlo was not always written well, but because it's written by the same writer, there's a story arc. He goes from villain to hero. That's also a unique amount of companions, where he finishes versus where he starts. I'm a big fan.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, none of the conflicts between the companions ever struck me as sort of gratuitous drama. I can't relate to that. But with Turlo especially, I remember as a kid how traumatic watching this guy come in, because he's sort of instantly likable, and then you discover he's evil within the same story. And knowing there was this sort of spy in the TARDIS, I found it incredibly compelling and really, really, really upsetting in the way it was intended to be.
Nice.
I liked how Tegan and Turlo got by the end, because I mean, she's totally suspicious of him the entire time. But then by the time he's starting towards the end of his run, they are siblings. That the arguments basically run more like brother sister rather than oh my gosh, this guy's evil.
Yeah, I was so sad when he left. I don't understand why Mark Strickson's career is not more. I don't know what he did. I don't know if he's mostly theatrical, because I've only ever seen him in one other thing.
He is a
filmmaker,
really well-known director and filmmaker. He has done lots of his main thing is nature documentaries, which he does for Nat Geo and Discovery and all these kind of things. Yeah, he's a big time.
I have research to do now.
Oh yes, absolutely.
That's great.
He discovered the crocodile hunter, by the way.
Yeah.
Have you all seen him A Christmas Carol? I think the best version of A Christmas Carol ever. Yes.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Good.
He's the best. Why is there not a Turlo action figure?
Yeah. Okay, so after companions,
does it have flying sharks?
No, maybe. I don't know what that means. So
okay. After companions, let's talk about some of the other memorable guest characters that came around during the Davison era. I'm talking about those one-off characters that are part of the population of a setting in one story. They add to that one story, but that's it, one and done. Who are some of the really standout side characters during this time?
Well, in
Is that-
Kinda, there was. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry.
Well, in
I think
Kinda, you
we're
didn't
all
have just
favorite
one. You had,
things. Yeah.
All right, Kathy, you go first.
well, in Kinda, you didn't have one. You had three. You had Todd.
Todd.
Yes. And you also had Panna. I really liked Panna.
Oh
And
yeah, me
her-
too.
Her
No, I
assistant.
think we're doing the same thing.
Because I like those three characters. They were just really good. They great world building.
Yeah.
That's really a Fifth Doctor thing. Now, the phrase world building, I mean, it's always been a Doctor Who thing, but yeah, there's a lot of that in the Fifth Doctor. You get a lot of detail. Well, and the Third Doctor. But anyway, yes. I was going to say maybe not more than that. Then I remembered the Fifth Doctor with things like the mutants and Colony in Space. Forget I said those things.
All right.
Robbie, fix this in post.
Oh, that's all staying in. Sorry, buddy.
Yep.
I just want to reiterate sort of what we were talking about with Kinda, because I think the dynamic between the Fifth Doctor and Todd is really interesting, because we have the Doctor playing off a companion, and Todd is very much the companion character in that story, who is physically older than the Doctor, and for the first time, that parent dynamic that we were talking about, that frustrated dad sort of energy that we're getting from Davison, is switched. And I think the two of them, I think maybe the Fifth Doctor gets along better with Todd than just about any companion or pseudo companion in the entire 3-year run. So just shout out to Todd.
There you go.
It's the first time I've thought of the Fifth Doctor as a grouchy old man, but yeah.
So to talk about JNT for a moment, JNT was not a sci-fi producer, but he was an actor's producer, and he had an eye on certain performers, and he brings in a lot of interesting guest stars throughout the run. There's Beryl Reid, there's Rodney Buse. The one that I want to talk about is Linda Barron. Now, she's only in parts 3 and 4 of Enlightenment. She's not in the whole story, so it's a rather small part. But she brings a theatrical energy to the role, the way that she stalks towards the camera, the way she dresses, the way she enunciates her words. She is by far my favorite guest performer in the entirety of the Davison era. And she's the reason that I can watch Enlightenment over and over again.
I think Enlightenment is amazing. Just
Oh,
all around.
Agreed. I can watch it over and over again, regardless. But
That's what happens when you put a female writer and a female director on the same episode. You get great content.
Right on.
Yep.
And that didn't happen often enough in the classic series.
Mhm.
So one of the ones that I really love is Jane Hampton from Awakening. She is sort of like the youngish school marm kind of character. But Drew's disagreeing with me. Oh, Drew, you're breaking my heart, man. So I love her. I think she adds so much to that story, and she goes right along with, the Doctor says crazy stuff about pteroleptals, and she doesn't know what he's talking about, but she just goes right along with it, and I thoroughly enjoy her in that story. And I'm surprised no one's brought up Richard Mace. He's always the first person
I
that
just assumed. I think he's too obvious.
exactly.
I thought everyone was going to say it simultaneously. I was going to say Murgrave from Castrovalva. Michael Sheard in one of his many, many Doctor Who appearances.
Yeah,
He's just always lovable.
yeah, he is.
I
The
love that at the
Garm.
end of Castrovalva, the Doctor runs back in to try and save Murgrave from this collapse of the city. Murgrave is a fictional character. He shouldn't even exist. The Doctor tries to save him anyway and make him a companion. I love that idea.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Annoyingly, the Portreeve is also really lovable, even though he's, who he is.
And head
Spoilers.
to the librarian.
What?
Yeah.
Yes, Shardavan, the sinister librarian.
Yes! Castrovalva, great. I love Castrovalva.
Love Castrovalva.
Interesting. I might have to disagree with you there, but that's okay.
Oh,
I know. So let's talk about some of the things that are, like, we're talking about Doctor Who essentials. If someone is a new series fan and they're wanting to explore the classic series like Joe and Tony have done, what are some of the essential elements that you think new fans should gravitate toward? What would you want to steer them towards as being essentials from the Davison era?
I mean, Enlightenment for sure.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's just a great piece of television just in general. So,
Okay, so this is a side question: the original or the remade version of it
I
that was on the
actually
DVD?
haven't seen the remade version.
Neither
So I
have I.
don't know.
CG is so bad. Like the model work is so much better than the CG.
I
know
saw
it's
some
not
comparisons and I agree. So yeah.
Generally, I like the CG, but the
Yeah.
ship, if they just didn't have the budget
Yeah.
for that level of modeling, the sails are completely. It's very odd.
And the original models just look beautiful. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was some gratuitous CG. I gotta say, and I think I say this all the time, the Five Doctors is. I didn't know who two of those doctors were the first time I saw it, and I was not in any way confused or thrown by it. I think it's a great introduction to what the show is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was my introduction. I didn't know who any of those doctors were. I didn't even know which characters on screen were doctors.
So I will say Caves of Androzani, and I'll give a few different reasons for that. It is the first of the classic series stories that is made as a cinematic single camera production rather than a multi-camera fourth wall live to tape. In fact, the director of Caves of Androzani, Graham Harper, is the only classic series director to come in and direct the new series. So there's a visual continuity there. It is perhaps Robert Holmes's best script. Alan, I want to cover your ears for a few seconds, but they wanted to get David Bowie as Shira's Jack. I think Christopher Gable does even better than Bowie might have been able to do. It's a fantastic performance. There's not a bad note in the whole story. It's the Davison era at its peak.
Yeah, it's a good thing they peaked at the last one. Who else has got an essential to throw in?
I want to say The Awakening, but I know there are elements of The Awakening that I'm thinking of new fans. People are more savvy now. The first time I watched The Awakening, I could never work out whether it was actually history or what was happening, but everything else in The Awakening is so good. It's one of those rare, like, pure horror episodes from that era. I love that one.
And it ends with 8 different characters in the TARDIS. I would love a Big Finish box with all 8 of those guys as companions for a couple of stories. I love that vibe at the end.
What a great idea.
Oh my god, that would be wonderful.
Keegan's grandfather, the guy from the 17th century, Jane, the farmer, the evil captain.
That is such a great idea. Get on it, Big Finish. Come on.
Yeah. I don't understand. The fact that the Malice is one of those things that has never reappeared that I would love to see again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another
I'd
one.
say both the Kinda and Snake Dance as well. Those
Yes.
both need to be.
Yes.
essentially.
Oh my gosh. I love Snake Dance so much. I love Kenda. Everybody loves Kenda. Everybody always points to Kenda as one of the biggies, but I love Snake Dance. Okay, so we talked about some essentials, and my next question is going to be about favorite stories, and I want to know about lesser favorite stories. And my plan in setting this up was that I was going to take off the table Androzani, Enlightenment, Earthshock, Five Doctors, because those always get mentioned as favorites. And luckily, you all have already tackled those in the previous questions. So I want to know what some of your lesser favorites are, some of those other ones that are on that level but never get mentioned.
Modern Undead.
Oh,
Yes.
Took mine.
Oh, love it.
I was waiting for that. Yeah. Yes.
I
Absolutely.
actually think Modern Undead is an essential. And I think, especially for viewers of the new show, it's one of the few classic Doctor Who's that deals with timey-wiminess. Like, it's a time travel show that actually has time travel in it. It expands Time Lord lore. It brings back a classic villain. I mean, classic in that it was just a couple of series before, but we have a new companion, also a compelling companion, as we've discussed before. Like, Turlo is a great companion. The first time through was definitely my favorite of the Fifth Doctor companions. The Return of the Brigadier, who, I mean, we probably should have brought him up in the secondary companion characters. And there's a kind of legit mystery that isn't solved until the end, until the 4th episode. So yeah, I think it's one that I come back to frequently, and it's one that I never hear people talking about.
Yeah.
And I don't understand it because it's
Spaghetti brains.
really good, and it feels like it has. Yeah, no, it's good. It's good.
Spaghetti brain.
Yeah, I love the continuity. I love the time travel. I love the production design on like. It's so good. I wondered if they were using someone else's sets. I mean, like that Art Deco ship is so meticulously detailed and so well constructed. Like every time I watch it, I'm blown away by how beautiful that is.
Yeah.
And it's another great Patty Kingsland rock and roll score, as I mentioned earlier. The hard guitar, the guitar line. I'm going to mention 2 stories. We mentioned Snake Dance earlier. Snake Dance has my single favorite scene of the 1980s when the Doctor is in Ambrose' office in part 2 and is showing up as this crazy old man who's trying to stop the ceremony. The whole business with the 6 faces of delusion, which is only 5 faces, and Ambrose says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's no 6. And the Doctor makes him wear it as a hat, and the 6th face is the wearer's own.
Yeah.
That is probably Doctor Who's most clever scene.
That is
But
good
the one
stuff.
that I really want to talk about here is Planet of Fire. Now, this is a story that there are some legitimate criticisms. It's a nightmare brief story. They threw so much at the writer. There's an awful lot going on. You're writing out a companion. Actually, you're writing out 2 companions. You're introducing a third. There's the master. There's the location. I think it works pretty well. Lanzarote is a terrific place for a shoot, and the new series has gone there several times for that exact same reason, because you have the beaches and you have the volcano setting. You have Peter Davison is really growing into the role, and he's really getting some meaty scripts in his final season. In fact, Davison said that if he had known season 21 was going to be that good, he wouldn't have left when he did.
Yeah.
It's a story that's about Turlough, so you have the benefit of Mark Strickson's performance. I'm not sure that Nicola Bryant is my favorite companion, but you can't get through that story without talking about her in the bikini. I think this is Anthony Ainley's best performance as the Master, especially the part 1 cliffhanger when Chameleon turns into the Master. It's one of my favorites. And I think the core of the story is this lost colony, the volcano god who's not really a god. I think it's really clever writing, and maybe that's hidden a little bit because you have so much series mythology that has to be brought in over that, but the underlying story about the colony of Sarn and the blue flame I think is really, really good. So I think Planet of Fire does not get nearly enough credit.
I love the scene where the Doctor fixes the blue flame issue, and whatever the character's name is says, "Logar be praised," and the Doctor very indignantly says, "Logar had very little to do with it."
Also, I want to say that there definitely is some fan service with the bikini thing, but if that's not your jam, Mark Strickson strips down later. So
there you go. Something for the whole audience.
I never thought Perry really worked with the 5th Doctor. I mean, for me, even at the time, they didn't gel in the way she and the 6th Doctor did. You know, they became such a great team.
You know what's weird about that? I think this is a slight sidebar, but yeah, I think Tegan actually works better with the 6th Doctor from that one little.
Jim will fix it.
Yeah, when they work together much better than Perry and 6 to me. So I think Tegan should have been with 6. Yeah,
I'm surprised that doesn't happen in any of the novels or Big Finish, since they've been shuffling companions around.
That's true.
Yeah, they would
haven't done that
together.
But
Perry had some of the same sort of. Perry was. That's always what I liked about her, was that she was willing to stand up to him, and they had this sort of, not quite sibling relationship, but they had this sort of argumentatively affectionate relationship. I loved that about Perry and the 6th Doctor. But we're off on the wrong Doctor now. Sorry, I did that.
So underrated. You said okay. So we can't talk about Enlightenment or Kinda, and those are 2 of my favorites. One of them that's almost up there for me is Black Orchid, but like the 1.5 episodes. I think it completely falls apart at the end. But the first episode and the first half of the second episode, I think, are just amazing. It's like doing something it hasn't done. Like, it's a pure historical, which they haven't done since the second Doctor era. So
yeah.
It feels fresh and new, and it's just, I love that the whole energy of that whole thing. So
one of the things about that I love is in the Davison era, they got into the pattern of doing a two-parter each year, and the two-parter always is either the historical or has historical elements to it, and I love that. I love having 7 stories per season as opposed to 6, with a big 6-parter. And it's like reading a short story as opposed to a novel, where a short story is a very particular art form and it's much different than writing a novel. I love all of the Davison 2-parters. I love King's Demons, and I absolutely love Awakening. It is it's possibly my favorite Peter Davison story. It's so good. The script is so witty, and the enemy is so interesting, and all the historical elements that are folding into modern day is so interesting. I love it, absolutely. And it has one of my favorite lines of dialogue ever written in Doctor Who, where the Doctor comes in and says, you can't do whatever it is you're doing because it's wrong and you'll fail, and it's wrong and he's evil. And there's like, you speak treason. He says fluently. That is good stuff, man.
That line was taken from the 1938 Robin Hood movie, which I didn't find out until decades later. But it's a good place to get your dialogue from.
Really? That's so interesting. I never knew that. You have learned me a thing.
Fifth Doctor is a classic movie fan.
Yeah.
So we talked a minute ago about, we made a little reference to Big Finish. Talk about some of the Fifth Doctor in other media, whether that be novels or comics or Big Finish. What are some of the things that people, if they're Fifth Doctor fans, should be looking for in those other media?
Spare parts.
It's always the first one that gets mentioned. And
Yes, it's such a good story.
For very good reasons, it's always the first one mentioned.
And not necessarily because it's the Fifth Doctor, but it's just a good story.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And an important one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Time Crash, which is a new series special where you have Peter Davison paired off against his future son-in-law, David Tennant. That is a love letter to the Davison era.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, undeniably.
And look, I'm wearing a vegetable. Love that line.
I don't know. In the other media, I mean, certainly there's some fun stuff in Big Finish. Like, I guess it was his very first scene in the Sirens of Time. That's just, and they replayed the flipping the coin thing with the stereo effect where he goes the other way, which I think Peter Davison put that in himself, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think of something other than Big Finish. I read the Fifth Doctor comics when I was a kid, not the Marvel comics, not the strips from Doctor Who magazine.
Tides of Time, Stars Fall on Stockbridge, Horror, all very good.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of those same ones.
Yeah.
I've only seen 2 other things, which is the
that was my foray into Doctor Who.
And what's the other one? Dimensions in Time. So those, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, but the 5-ish Doctors are so good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh my God, yes.
Better than Dimensions in Time.
Well,
I'm trying to think of any of his novels from the Virgin or the BBC ranges that really stood out. Not coming up with anything.
The Sands of Time by Justin Richards is a sequel to Pyramids of Mars. I don't think it's as good as Pyramids of Mars, but it does very creative things with the Nyssa/Anne Talbot duplicate.
Oh, yeah.
I need to reread that because I'd completely forgotten that. All right, I have a book to read. Oh, Cold Fusion.
Yes, Lance Parkin, the 7th Doctor crossover.
Yeah, which so naturally I would love that. But I love the way he and Adric especially come across in Cold Fusion, which is one of the Virgin Past Doctor adventures for anyone who hasn't read it.
Yeah.
Missing Adventures, all right? They were the Missing Adventures.
Yes, the MAs.
Exactly.
They were the best.
Okay, so we're kind of coming down to the end. I just want to know your final thoughts about the Peter Davison era, what you love about it, what you may not love as much about it. Just whatever you want to say about the Fifth Doctor era. Let's have it.
I'll quote David Tennant. He was my
The Doctor carried guns too often.
Mm. Mm.
That's
That's
yeah.
I blame
That's a
Eric
valid
Sayward
point.
for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
has
yeah.
so many things. Is that really? Was that him?
Yeah.
I did not
Yeah.
know that.
So that's the
was
bad thing
something-
about that era is Eric Sayward.
Yeah, that's the one bad thing. I was gonna say I can't think of anything bad, but no, I've got one now.
Yeah.
Eric Sayward.
wow. Poor old Eric.
Eric Sayward is
Even if I
good.
didn't like his contributions to the show, and just watching him in interviews, he's so
Yeah.
rude.
Oh, I do not like him.
Sorry.
But I like the way the companions worked together. We had we had a lot of non-Earth based people as companions.
Yeah.
That's true.
And there's a sense of family in the Fifth Doctor era that I don't think I get anywhere else. I guess because there are so many people, it's part of it. But even when with the First Doctor, when there were, Ian and Barbara and Susan, you had the three companions, but it always felt like they were fractious in some way. Ian and Barbara were always together, or the Doctor and Susan, or Ian, Barbara and Susan. The Doctor was, but with all of the Fifth Doctor's companions, it always felt like a family, even when it was just Tegan and Turlough. To me.
Mm-hmm.
And the bit in Frontios where the Doctor tries to pass Tegan off as an android so she doesn't get abducted and turned into a slave is just hilarious. And
Yes.
then that's Peter Davison and Janet Fielding have terrific comic timing, which Sayward didn't really allow them to use. But in this one story, they're gold together.
If you ever listen to any of the audio commentaries or any of the behind the scenes stuff on any of the DVDs or Blu-rays, you will know the relationship that Peter Davison and Janet Fielding have together. They are comic gold.
I gotta say, I'm glad you mentioned Janet Fielding. I was so happy when Big Finish announced that Janet Fielding was sort of coming back into the fold. Like, I never thought we would hear from her again. I thought Doctor Who was in her past, and she may be my favorite companion, Tegan.
Yeah.
And I love Janet Fielding as a person. And I was so happy that she came back to do them. Like, every second she's in character makes me happy.
I did not like her when she started, and then by the end of her run, I loved her. So
Yeah. That was another one of those things. When I was a kid, I didn't pick up on how obnoxious she was. Like, at no point did I object to her or Adric. Any of the companions people object to for their behavior. I'm like, no, I'm not.
But Tegan's basically the role model for the newer companions because they don't put up with stuff anymore.
Right. Yeah, 100% agreed. All right. Well, that's basically our time. So thank you all so much for spending an hour with me chatting about one of my favorite periods of Doctor Who. Andy, where can people find more of you on the internet?
Me personally, ooh, look at that. Me personally, I'm a freelance artist. I do a little of everything. Mostly I sculpt these days, and I do oil paintings, and that's at eldritchstudio.com. And I also run the big Dragon Con Doctor Who group, Pride on Academy, which is largely costuming, also just a general fan group. And we have a forum, although no one on the internet uses forums anymore. We also have a Facebook group for that reason.
Kathy, how about you?
At CatherineSullivan.com, I write young adult, middle grade science fiction and fantasy. I also contribute reviews to books such as Ellen's Children of Time, which I think there are several other authors in this book, as well as reviews in Outside In and Chicks Dig Time Lords.
Right on. Joe.
I'm everywhere on the internet at Minty Pineapple or mintypineapple.com. I make short videos and I write articles and stuff. I have a podcast that I do with my wife Tony, which is called The Watchathon of Rassilon, where we're going through all of Doctor Who in order. We just recently finished classic Doctor Who. We're about to start New Who, and that's at watchyourrassilon.com.
Drew, people are looking for you, man. Where are they going to find you?
I do a lot of podcasting. So I've got several monthly podcasts that I contribute to. First and foremost, Who and Company with my friend Brent Johnson, which can be found at whoandcompany@libsyn.com. I also take part in an international Doctor Who podcast called The Doctor Who Podcast, which can be found at thedoctorwhopodcast.com. I contribute monthly in comedy sketches to the Reality Bomb podcast, which is at realitybombpodcast.com. If you want older episodes, Gallifrey Pirate Radio, both podcast and on YouTube with David Beauchamp. And if you like movies and role-playing games, I have a movie and role-playing game podcast called Never Say Die at the Never Say Die podcast.podbean.com.
My God, I'm exhausted just listening to all of that.
Oh, there's
you
more of them.
sleep?
I just went to the ones that I actually consistently contribute to. So,
I wondered why you had that professional setup with a really nice camera.
Right. Jason, how about you?
My day job is in the legal profession, so I do not do science fiction for a living, but it is a very time-consuming hobby. I am in all of the Outside In volumes. I am involved primarily with 2 podcasts. I am one of the rotating panel of hosts on Trap One. That's Trap One ONE at trap1one.podbean.com. My solo podcast is Doctor Who Literature. I am going through the Target novelizations from the 70s and 80s in publication order. I just released today episode 38, The Mask of Mandragora. I have Philip Hinchcliffe on as an interview. So I've just finished the first 5 years worth of Target books. I'm moving on to 1978 soon. I have a different guest on every episode, so that is a lot of fun and is just a tremendous thing to do in my spare time.
How
I'm
do you
on
have
Twitter
spare
at
time as a lawyer? That's crazy. So much spare time.
So lastly, you can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels and under the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, DRWho in both instances. I've been watching the entire run of the series for the last year and a half. I'm right now in the middle of Peter Capaldi's run, having started with William Hartnell, and that has been a fun project. Every night I post my thoughts about the episode that I'm watching. Please join me and join in the conversation.
And I am an author. I have a little publishing company called Cosmic Press, which you can find at cosmicpress.com or at Cosmic Press on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And here's one of my books. It's Star Trek's Greatest Hits. And I've got some other things in the works. I also do a couple of other podcasts. I have a Star Trek podcast called Earth Station Trek, which treks through all of Star Trek from the early days on NBC to the current days on Paramount Plus. And we cover all sorts of topics in between. And I have a music podcast called Modern Musicology, which covers just anything you can imagine. We might have a topic that will jump from Frank Sinatra to Parliament Funkadelic to Metallica all in one sentence, because we're made up of a group of people who love all kinds of music. So thank you all so much for joining. And for the viewers, thanks so much for watching. It was a pleasure to have everyone joining with us. Thank you for watching. And you can find BritTrack on Twitter at BritTrack, Instagram at DC BritTrack, YouTube and Facebook, The BritTrack. And if you're watching this during the convention and you're at the convention, come look for us on panels. Come visit the BritTrack in the BritTrack room. And if you're not, well, we're sorry to miss you. But you've got a lot of virtual content that you can watch. So to all my panelists, thank you so much for sitting in and having this great discussion. Everybody have a fantastic rest of the convention if you're there, and a fantastic rest of the week if you're not. Everybody take care, be good to each other, do good things in the world, and we will see you soon.
Mustache.
Bye.